It's episode 190 of the Author Stories Podcast. I'm your host, Hank Garner. 190 episodes, that means we're quickly approaching 200. I'm going to put together a special episode 200, and I would love to have some audio clips from you. If you would like to contribute something to the 200th episode, email it to me at hankgarner@gmail.com. Today's show is brought to you by lootcrate.com. Save 10% on any new subscription at trylootcrate.com/Hank and enter the promo code BRIDGE10 for 10% savings. No matter what you geek out about, Loot Crate has a monthly subscription box for you. Exclusive collectibles, apparel, and gear delivered to your door. Save 10% on any new subscription at trylootcrate.com/Hank. And don't forget the promo code BRIDGE10 to get 10% off. Also, Dying Days by Armand Rosamilia. Armand is one of my favorite writers, and Dying Days has quickly become a favorite. Sunny Florida, beautiful beaches, no traffic on the A1A, zombies roaming the dunes in search of the living. Darlene Bobich is in a fight to survive, find food, safety, and ammo for her desert eagle before it's too late. The undead are coming to exterminate the human race. That's Dying Days by Armand Rosamilia. There's a link in the show notes. Great summer reads. Speaking of great summer reads, don't forget Patricia Gilliam's Out of the Gray. Book 1 in the Hanaria series. When an Earth-based terrorist group targets Hanaria's ambassador, 2 teenagers become entrapped in the conflict. There's 5 books in the series so far. Each one takes different viewpoint characters. Wonderful, wonderful science fiction. I cannot recommend it enough. It's Out of the Gray by Patricia Gilliam. Also, don't forget Stefan Bolt's new book, Six String. I'll give you this personal endorsement. My daughter was looking for some new books to read for the summer. I brought her out to my office. We started going through, and I said, have you read Stefan's new book? And she said, no, I haven't got to it yet. I said, you got to read this one first. She read half the book in one sitting, and she said, I'm instantly hooked. This is my new all-time favorite book. It's Six String by Stefan Boltz. It carries a personal Garner family recommendation. Ed Gosney and his blog, Cool Comics in My Collection. You've heard me talk about it before. Ed is looking for folks to contribute some writing to the blog. So if you love comic books now, or maybe you look back on your past with fondness and those days that you loved comic books and that those stories really spoke to you, reach out to Ed. He would love to hear from you and to tell a great story on his blog about what you love about it. I recommended last time on the show Transmutations, The Strange Change Chronicles Book 1 from Ed. I still recommend that. Grab it for your summer reads. I think you'll love it. Also, Galactic Satori Chronicles by Nick Breaker and Paul Hicks. A thirst for revenge sends one man on a deadly journey through the galaxy in the adrenaline-pumping new novel Galactic Satori Chronicles. There's 2 books now, Earth and Kron. And these books are a gripping thrill ride, guaranteed to please science fiction fans. You're going to love these books. I give them my personal recommendation. Also, Draft to Digital. If you are an author and you're looking to get your books out on every platform available, go to draft2digital.com/author stories and sign up now. They have a lot of tools there that are great for authors. They can help you get your work out so that all of the eyes that are available for ebooks can see them. draft2digital.com/author stories. I think when you log in and upload your book, you're going to be amazed at the work they're doing. draft2digital.com/author stories. Stay tuned after the show for a clip from the Jason Crane series by Richard Glebes. Thanks for listening. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to bring you an interview with Bill Schutt, who has a brand new book that launches in about a week from when this episode airs, and it's called The Himalayan Codex, an R.J. McCready novel. Bill Schutt is a fascinating guy. I can't wait for you guys to hear what he has to say. But welcome to the show, Mr. Schutt.
It's really, really nice to be here. Thanks, Hank.
Sure. I begin each interview with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or a storyteller?
Yikes. It was probably when I was in elementary school and came up with the idea to write a short story that was humorous on Mahatma Gandhi. It was really strange. Yeah.
I love that. Out of let's see, over 200 authors that I have interviewed by this point now, the vast majority say that their beginnings of wanting to be a storyteller always goes back to those early impressionable days of elementary school or sometimes before then, with the very rare exception that some folks said they'd never even thought about it until college or, later. So what was it about that story that captured your imagination and that made you want to, put your spin on it or whatever?
I guess I've always been into comedy and movies, and I was a huge fan of Woody Allen's, and I just thought it would have made it for kind of an interesting take on a very serious story to put some humor into it. And it's something that I've tried to do with all of my writing. I'm a college professor, and I don't think that you can keep an audience of college students entertained learning what you want to get across without making it entertaining and trying to bring humor into the mix. So, even though I write about cannibalism or blood feeding, there are places where you can go in there and just try to lighten things up. So I guess I've always been that way, and I think I got that from my parents. Both of my parents were really funny, and we've always, humor has been very important to us.
Yeah, my wife and I have 5 kids, and when you have a family as big as ours, you learn that a sense of humor goes a long way. And,
absolutely.
And we've been accused of having a little smartassery that we've bred into our kids, but I'll take that. That's okay. But speaking of that sort of humorous twist. And I want to get into this more in just a few minutes, but you mentioned that your book on cannibalism. When I first heard from your publicist, I thought I misread her email when she sent it, and I had to read it 2 or 3 times to get because your book on cannibalism, several reviews were like, it's a jolly read. It's which is hilarious. And then I started flipping through it, and I was like, this is amazing how someone could take something this dark and twisted and make it palatable. Forgive the pun.
Yeah. You really have to pick your spots, especially with something like that. I mean, with that type of a topic, there's a lot of human suffering that's gone into some of the stories.
Obviously.
And so you got to, you can't be looking for yucks in all the wrong places. But
sure.
But I do think that really just about any topic lends itself to go in with a light touch. And I tried to back off on my nonfiction. I've tried to back off on the jargon and to take an approach that my readers are probably not scientists and they're not interested in the technical detail, but they may be interested in some of the cool stories that they might not have heard previously.
Sure. When you were younger and you got the idea to tell this story, after that, was this something that stayed with you? And did you ever think of this as, I could be one of those people that writes books that will be in a store one day?
Yeah, I think I've always been probably the main reason that I'm a writer now is because I've always been an avid reader. I'm usually reading 2 or 3 books at a time, and,
Sure.
and it's been that way since probably 4th or 5th grade. So I've had a lot of incredible influences. So I don't think it was a stretch, and I started to write. Nothing that was ever published or that I ever submitted anywhere, except maybe in a classroom setting. But I started writing when I was really young, and I remember writing a short science fiction story about a kid who goes around the neighborhood and collects junk, and he finds this strange cylinder and drags it back to his house, and neighborhood dogs and cats start disappearing, and his mother starts to get suspicious and goes back and finds out what this thing is that he's got in the garage. I remember writing that when I was about in 5th, 6th grade. But I guess I've always enjoyed writing, probably as an offshoot of loving to read so much.
Sure. Sure. Did your family encourage this when they started noticing that you had a propensity for this sort of thing?
Absolutely. My parents were extremely hardworking. They were not college educated, and they worked far harder than I've ever worked or will ever work. But they were terrific. I've had, I'm a zoologist, so I've had a love of animals for a very long time, and they were, right there encouraging me when I was looking under rocks and logs and bringing back all sorts of strange critters. And as a kid, I had a monkey, and that's the kind of thing that my parents were, they were just terrific about all of the things that a lot of other people were, raising their eyebrows and going, "Geez, he's a little weird, isn't he?" And my parents would laugh it off. And
you were that kid that we all wanted to be after we saw that.
I don't know about that.
After we saw it was Clint Eastwood movies in the '70s where you had the orangutan. Or
yeah, Every Which Way But Loose.
Yeah.
It was a much smaller monkey. I don't know if the movie would have been such a hit if he had a squirrel monkey rather than an orangutan.
Right.
But it would probably cost a lot more than $29.99 at a department store, which is what we paid for it, if you can believe it.
You're kidding me.
Absolutely
at a department
not. With
store.
a cage. Yeah, with a cage. Back in those days, you could buy just about anything. You didn't have the laws preventing animals from being brought into the country and sold.
Wow, that is amazing. So was there ever any doubt in your mind that you would be a zoologist?
Oh, no. Right from the start. Absolutely. Wanted to, one of my first heroes was Jacques Cousteau, and so I initially started out studying marine science, and then moved away from that when I thought I might be, getting too specific too soon, and just went straight biology with an organismal background, and then, I did that for my master's degree, and up at Cornell I studied vampire bats, and it was just, it was something. Well, here's the story. My mother who's passed away finds my elementary school yearbook, and I hadn't seen it in years and years. It was buried someplace, and she shows it to me. She says, "Billy, you got to see this." So I looked at my picture. There's this little gawky kid, and it says, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And it said, "I want to work at the American Museum of Natural History." And I went, "Oh my God!" and so I had to bring it in to show my colleagues. And I said, "Look at this." Even I was 11, and I wanted to work here, so it's been a dream, and I'm one of those people who, I don't think I'm all that. I never really thought I was that incredibly bright, but I always had a knack for hanging out with wonderful mentors, just people who were incredibly supportive, who were not out to use me to whenever teach their classes or do this or that for them, but were really looking out for me, and I've been really lucky in that regard, and most of the success that I have, I ascribe to that type of thing, to that support that I had.
Sure, I'd really like to highlight that, Bill, because I think that is a life lesson right there. No matter what your pursuit is, your ability to find people that you can learn from,
no doubt.
is crucial. And that's the exact reason I started this podcast, is because I wanted to be a better writer, and the only way I knew to get better at what I love to do was to be around people that were better than me, and to learn from them at every turn. And if you can do that, if you can ever humble yourself and admit that you don't know everything, and can find people that you would like to emulate or that you would like to learn from, that is crucial. And
absolutely,
I love that that's your story as well.
Yeah, I tell all of my students that are right before they graduate, if I get to talk with them, I'll just tell them that look for mentors that you can trust. Surround yourself with people who are looking out for you, and that you don't have to worry about, and that will, that's just a huge, we don't have to worry about, is this guy, what is this guy's ulterior motive?
Right.
When you don't have to worry about that, then you can really get down and get into some interesting material.
That's great. What does a zoologist do for a living? I think a lot of people, when you say that word, think that you're going to work at a zoo or something like that. But what does that actually look like in real life?
I would say that most of us are college professors.
Okay.
So myself, I teach full-time at Long Island University Post on Long Island. And when you're a tenured faculty member, or even when you're not, you do have your summers and you have a winter break during which you're expected to do research. So for 20 years or so, that's what I did, and I would write scientific papers, and I would go on trips around the world collecting bats and doing, working on their behavior and all sorts of really interesting stuff. So I would say that that's probably 80% of zoologists are doing that type of thing, and that's that sounds about right. But now that I've been tenured for 10 years or so now, I got the opportunity to move away from writing papers, writing journal papers, and writing books, and so I jumped on it. I was really interested because the first book that I wrote was on the natural history of blood and blood feeding creatures. Right. So it was really an extension of my research. So Dark Banquet was easy to write. Because I use a lot of my experiences.
And did this come out of your time at Cornell, I think you said, where you were studying bats?
Yeah. So it was written, that book was published in 2008, and I graduated from Cornell in 95 with a PhD. So, but I used all of the stories of what I had done with my work with vampire bats. I went to Trinidad with my wife. We brought back 40 vampire bats, 2 different species, and we maintained them in upstate New York for 2 years, and we didn't lose a bat. And so that was an interesting story, getting up at 4:00 in the morning, going to the slaughterhouse to collect blood, storing it in Snapple bottles, and so a lot of that story was written, and it was at least in my mind, so it was easy to do. And then I just moved into bed bugs were big at the time, so I did a chapter on bed bugs, and I've always been a huge fan of Humphrey Bogart and the African Queen, and I wanted to. When I got the chance to write about leeches, I said, "Well, I'm going to open this leech chapter through the eyes of the leeches that are attacking Bogart, and as he's pulling the African Queen down the river." And so that was kind of the learning curve wasn't as steep as when I decided to write a book, my follow-up book on cannibalism. And what did I know from cannibals? So there was a lot more work, and it was more difficult. But once again, the people that I hooked up with, whether it was at the Museum of Natural History or researchers like Dr. Fennig out in Arizona working on spadefoot toads, or hooking up with Donner Party researchers and that are doing an incredible work right now. That was that got really interesting because I did not have that background. So I guess that's the long-winded version of your question.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. When you were working on Dark Banquet, did the keeping the vampire bats and the harvesting blood for them and all that, did that make you more or less popular at dinner parties when you tell those stories?
Oh no, it's funny because when people with social media, sometimes you won't talk to people for 20, 30 years, and they're like, "Oh, so what do you do for a living, Schutt?" And I'm like, well, I started out working on vampire bats, and now I'm writing books about cannibals, and no one is surprised. No one is. They're like, "Yeah, it sounds about right." So, I think people found it fascinating, especially since they were so gentle. When you think about vampire bats, you think, "Oh my God, these must be these like giant horror show creatures,"
right. And
they're little tiny things, and they were gentle as can be. I had these bats for 3 years, and not once in the entire 3-year stretch did one of them ever try to bite me. Not one time. You got to figure how much bigger are you than these animals, and when you're handling them, of course, with gloves, and they're still not trying to bite you.
Wow.
So there's a lot of misconceptions out there, and that's what I get to do. I get to go in and demystify grotesque subjects like blood feeding or cannibalism, and put a zoological perspective on it. And then I lucked out, and I can do this in my fiction writing as well, because the McCready series has a lot of science in it, and we try to. There's nothing in there that we're making up. We may be stretching the truth. We may be keeping animals alive that might have gone extinct that could theoretically be alive someplace, but but we're not making up our monsters.
Right. let's touch on the cannibalism for just a minute before we switch over into your fiction.
Sure.
It sounds to me, and you said this just a minute ago, that in Dark Banquet and in the cannibalism book, you are taking these things that people have obvious preconceived notions about, and it seems to me like you're pulling back the layers a little bit to show the truth of that. And were you surprised by things that you learned that went against the kind of pop culture ways that these things have permeated into our brains?
No doubt. You nailed it. And if I can just talk about cannibalism, the new book is Cannibalism, A Perfectly Natural History. And if I can, there were two huge surprises. First of all, I surveyed the animal kingdom, which had never been really done before, to look at the ways that cannibalism is employed by creatures, for example, as parental care or as a reproductive behavior. And so it was a huge surprise to me to find that cannibalism was so widespread across the animal kingdom. In some groups, much more common than others, of course. But that blew me away, because up until recently, the party line among scientists had been, if you saw cannibalism in the animal kingdom, except for a couple of weirdos like black widow spiders, praying mantises, everybody, you've heard those stories. Well, those turned out to be mostly exaggerations, but the line was that, except for these strange cases, that if you saw cannibalism, it was going to be because there was a lack of food or was overcrowding due to captive conditions,
or something
sticking
wrong.
These creatures in a cage. Yeah, right. So abnormal behavior. Not true. And that was a huge, huge surprise. With human cannibalism, once I got into that, the thing that really blew me away is that, first of all, we have this long-established taboo about cannibalism,
sure.
and I found it fascinating to go in and try to figure out how that developed. Why when I mention the word cannibalism, do you have this knee-jerk reaction thinking of Jeffrey Dahmer or the guys that are stuck in the Andes? Why do you have that? How did that develop? What is how did that come about? But given that we had this taboo, what blew me away was the fact that for hundreds of years in Europe, starting in the Middle Ages, throughout the Renaissance, and right up until the beginning of the 20th century, just about every body part that you can imagine was consumed or prepared into a medicine to treat just about everything you can think of as far as something that might go wrong with you illness-wise, from headaches to epilepsy. It was wild, because I'd never heard of that. They did a great job of covering that up once they decided that it didn't have any medicinal benefit. So that blew me away. Given this taboo, the fact that from kings to commoners, body parts were consumed for all sorts of reasons.
Wow.
Up until relatively recently.
What was the most disturbing thing that you learned, other than just that it was commonplace?
Yeah. Well, the most disturbing thing that I learned was how the term cannibal was used to subjugate indigenous people, and really the prime criminal in that story turned out to be, for me, Christopher Columbus, who once they didn't find any gold in the Caribbean, he looked for another resource, and what he found were humans. And Queen Isabella had told him that you can't enslave these people. You've got to treat them well, unless you find out that they're cannibals, and then all bets are off.
Oh, wow.
And you can really do anything you want. Then they're not even human. So lo and behold, these groups of indigenous islanders that were on Columbus' first journey, they were characterized as being nice and pleasant. They were, they could fall into line, probably become Christians. After they couldn't find any gold, the next 3 trips turned out to be more like invasions. And these people and their cultures were utterly destroyed because they had been labeled cannibals. Now, whether they were or not, and there was probably ritual cannibalism that took place, burial rites. These are the folks who they never learned that, you're supposed to bury your dead because that's the Christian way. They had rites and rituals. Culture is king. So they developed their own rituals, like possibly consuming their dead, or cannibalism after warfare. That's that type of thing, as sort of a or whatever.
Right.
But in any event, Columbus used that term, and many people that followed him used it to literally destroy cultures from the Caribbean into Mexico, South America, and then over into Africa. That was, that term was just, when you said cannibal, I mean, really what that meant was anybody who's different than us, anyone who resists, you're a cannibal.
Wow. That's a familiar story. But we'll just leave that there. You also mentioned the Donner Party a minute ago. Is there new information coming out about that?
Yeah, and that was a surprise, because when I started writing this book, I thought to myself, well, it was like, when I wrote the book about blood feeding, I thought, when I got to mosquitoes, I was like, well, this has been done. I've read a number of books. It's been really, so much work has been done, I'm going to de-emphasize it. And I thought the same would be true with the Donners. I thought, well, this happened. It's the arguably the most famous example of cannibalism, at least in the United States. So what else is going to be there to write about, since this happened in 1847? And just at the time when I started to write this, two things happened. One was that there was this false media report that came out that said that the Donners were not cannibals. And so I started to question the Donner Party researchers that I was meeting, and I said, "Is any of this true?" And they just shook their heads, and they're like, "Oh my God, no." Our department at a college, who had one of their graduate students was working on an archaeological site, digging up artifacts and bones, and it was a cook site. It was where you found animal bones and things that the Donners had been eating, and they didn't find any human bones. So the PR department jumped on this, and before you know it, there were headlines: Donner Party, no cannibalism. It was about religion, or it was about race. And in reality, that was just not the case at all, because the only reason they found the bones is because they had been cooked and cooked and recooked and then cooked again to get every bit of nutrition out of them. And they were all animal bones. So it was all animal stuff. They had 1,600 pieces of bone, and there was not one bit of human bone in there. So they said, no humans were cannibalized. In reality, when cannibalism took place with the Donners, it took place late in the game. And up till then, they had been killing their livestock, their pets, the animals that they hunted, and recooking and cooking to get every bit of nutrition out of it. By the time at the very end of their stay, the survivors, the ones who did cannibalize, by the time they did that, they decided that cannibalism was the only way they were going to live. There was basically a lot of bodies, so they didn't have to process and reprocess and cook and recook the bones. So the human bodies weren't treated the same, so they didn't preserve in the record. You only found these, but basically to end that story, the media just completely blew it by misinterpreting the results of this researcher who never meant to say that there was no cannibalism. They just blew that one. So that came out. And then I worked with historical human remains detecting dogs to find the real locations of some of the major players in the Donner Party story. And so I was actually out there with these really cool, it was a border collie, just super interesting how they can find where people died, 150 years ago.
Amazing. That is amazing.
Yeah.
What was your when you finished that book and turned it in and it was all finished? How had you, as a scientist and as a person, how had your ideas changed about this topic?
Oh, great question. Like I said, well, first of all, one of the things that we now know that I hope comes out of this book is that there was probably less cannibalism that took place ritually than people might have been led to believe up until fairly recently, and that's because anthropologists and archaeologists have gotten a lot more rigorous with regard to the evidence that they will require before they label a group as cannibals. that was that was something that I'm really proud that my fellow researchers, they did that one. So it's no more, they're getting away from the sort of like knee-jerk labeling of any group that processed bones, for example, in a certain way as being cannibals. Right. So that was a change, so that opened my eyes a bit. And as I guess the other, as I sort of mentioned before, is I had no clue that it was so widespread in nature, and the realization that it is actually a very normal behavior for reasons that don't have anything to do, in most instances, don't have anything to do with a lack of food. That was a big surprise, and I've got a different way to look at, just another way to look at animals now than I had going in there.
And cannibalism is a very compelling read, very easy to read, very easy to get immersed into, which I think is a tribute to your fiction writing, because your storytelling skill comes out in this very difficult topic and very very heady stuff that you make it very accessible to the layman and to people that probably do have preconceived notions like I did, and when you start flipping through there, you're like, well, this maybe people are more complex than we thought, so that brings me around to your fiction. Tell me a little bit about you guys. The Himalayan Codex comes out in just a few days. It comes out on June 6th, I believe it is, and and it is it follows up on the heels of a book called Hell's Gate, and you co-wrote both of these books with J.R. Finch, I believe it is. First off, how did your partnership with J.R. Finch come about, and why did you want to write fiction?
Well, I've always wanted to write fiction, and I'm not doing a lot of commenting about my co-author, except the fact that we work very well together. He is a specialist in things that I'm not a specialist in, and we seem to tell a good tale. The Hell's Gate began when I was in central Brazil with a friend in the Plateau region about 15 years ago, and I just remembered the place was really desolate, and there's this 2,000-foot cliffs, and it's just an amazing area that you don't see a lot of. And I thought to myself, if it were 70 years ago and you wanted to hide something from the rest of the world, this would be the perfect place to do it. And I've always been a World War II buff, so I wanted to set my fiction back in the 1940s, and Hell's Gate takes place in 94. And it's about a zoologist who's called into that region when a team of rangers goes in. They send in these people, and they don't come back out. And what he finds when he goes in there is that there is an Axis plot to launch what was really on the drawing boards. It was in blueprint form, and we had these declassified Luftwaffe files of this rocketry that they were going to launch, and so we said, well, the rocket program got bombed pretty much into oblivion. So what happened if they moved that someplace? Because they didn't kill any of the scientists. So what if they moved that someplace where it was not going to be able to be attacked by the Allies? So that became the first book, and then so there was the story of the American, and there's the story of a young German scientist, and the stories come together below the cliffs of this plateau, and in the cliffs of the last 100. There's Modus Draculae, large prehistoric vampire bats, and they're not happy that anyone is there. So that's the plot of Hell's Gate. And so we, at the end of Hell's Gate, our hero brings home I don't want to tell the whole story, but he winds up bringing someone home with him, and she becomes his partner in the next book, which is the Himalayan Codex, where they're sent on a mission into Tibet to investigate this archaeological find.
Hell's Gate brings together something that is just some of the best fodder for thriller books. You've got a Nazi plot. You've got, forbidden places and, forbidden knowledge and people that know things that they shouldn't know. And, where did the idea for this, so you told about, how did these disparate things kind of come together in this book?
Oh, well, the vampire bats actually lived there, and they probably went extinct over the last 500 years. So that was easy to say. Well, what if they'd lived? And I worked with a researcher who thought that they still might be alive. So that was there. And then I'd always wanted to write a book about the Nazi. I just thought that there were parts of the Nazi weaponry program that if it had come to fruition, boy, it would have been incredibly scary. And so I found an example of that, and we wove that into this plot. And so there was a smart alecky zoologist. I don't know where I got that from. And I've always been a fan of sort of of big movies, the Great Escape or the Sand Pebbles, or just like big epic adventures. And that's what I wanted to that's really what we wanted to write here. So it was an homage to that type of story. And a lot of it was based on my love of that type of cinema. And we saw all these big scenes taking place. And it's exactly the same thing that we did as we moved the story 2 years later up into Tibet, because the creatures are different. And the villains are different, but the heroes are the same, and you're growing along with them, and their relationship is growing, and you just get a chance. So we weave all of these interesting real life figures into and out of these two books, and I'm not going to give it away, but there's some major people in these books that we portray as as characters who are reacting to the situations that we've put them in, and so we get to have a lot of fun with our heroes. And the time back then, the music, the slang fascinates me. We gave one of our characters a serious Brooklyn accent that his wife, who is an indigenous Brazilian, picks up. So she's got this Brooklyn accent out of nowhere, it seems.
That's great.
And so it's just been a lot of fun, and we tried once again to keep it funny, but now in these books we want to scare the crap out of people. I'm really out to. Both of us were really influenced by the great scare films, Psycho, for example, Aliens, those types of movies, and we really wanted to have no cheap thrills here. We really wanted to make this as gripping as possible, and so we worked and reworked it so that we scared ourselves.
And sometimes injecting a little humor in a thriller makes it twice as scary, because you kind of put the reader or viewer at ease a little bit, and then bam, you pull the rug right back out from under them again. Yeah.
No doubt. Alfred Hitchcock is is somebody that is really my idol in many ways, and I guess it's not too big of a spoiler to say that he does show up in the Himalayan Codex.
Awesome.
So that's the type of cinema that intrigued me, and so when I'm writing fiction, it's really you can do all these kinds of cool things that you can't with nonfiction. You can stretch things and bring in people who are dead and envision what their dialogue was like and how they reacted and what their quirks were and what their favorite curse words were and what music they listened to, and it's you're building this world. But you're also using your expertise to bring in your information about the tropics or the specific animals or the historical events that are playing out there. We don't make anything up as far as that goes.
James Cameron, director, writer, explorer, said, "Looks like Schutt and Finch are filling the void left by the passing of Michael Crichton." How did that make you feel?
Amazing. Yeah, he's been extremely supportive of my work and of our work, and so it's a thrill when you're getting people like James Cameron and James Rollins and Clive Cussler, and with my nonfiction stuff it was E.O. Wilson. I literally fell over when I read a review by him. That's just that's a dream world, and you just try to you try to make them proud. If that's the way people think about you, then you're going to go the extra yard, and we work a lot of our dialogue back and forth just to make sure that there's no clanking going on. That this is the way people talk, and if that's not perfect, then we're going to go back and redo it, and we're going to make it perfect. I think we owe it to our readers now, and it's the response has been amazing, and we've got William Morrow's a wonderful publisher, and they've been terrific all along the line. And my editor is, possibly quite arguably the top thriller editor in the world. And so to be able to have that opportunity, you really want to give it your best.
For sure. You told a little bit about at the end of the previous book. It sort of sets up the beginning of the Himalayan Codex, or at least a scenario for it. What can you tell us about the plot of this book that our intrepid hero and his cohort get themselves into?
Well, both of the books are based out of what is, in a sense, the Museum of Natural History. Of course, we've given the name a tweak. And in the Himalayan Codex, just as they're sort of getting settled into life 2 years after the trauma that takes place in Hell's Gate, they're presented with a really intriguing mission, and that is that they found some recent skeletal remains of a creature that should not exist. So I won't give too much of that away. But that just becomes a cover story because they're also presented. They're also presented with. I thought I'd turn this off. Everybody wanted to hear Lou read anyway. So they're presented with evidence that Pliny the Elder has written a codex about a missing time period in his life when he actually traveled to the Himalayas. And so half of the book takes place 2,000 years ago, as the initial adventure is taking place by Pliny and a group of Romans who are going up into this region. And then you sort of flash back and forth between 67 A.D. and 1946, when there's this similar type of interaction taking place, but things have changed. And that was one of the things that was the most fun, or the differences between the world that Pliny encounters and the world that Mac and Yanni encounter, and that was a lot of fun because it's not the same place.
Right. How is your creative process different in writing fiction and your nonfiction? I would think that nonfiction, you sort of have it. Well, you have research, and then you have evidence, and then you lay out the evidence. But that's a little different than coming up with an idea, a what if scenario, and then placing these people in danger and seeing how they react.
Yeah, I mean, we want to stay as historically, as scientifically, as technologically accurate as possible. So a lot of that same care that goes into writing nonfiction goes into the McCready series, because we're dealing with the actual weaponry, and we're how to take this gun apart, how to put it back together, what are its characteristics. This creature, how would it behave? All right, well, I'm a zoologist, so I can sort of infer that it might do this. So there's it's surprisingly, I guess, there's not to me at least, there's not a massive difference, because there's a lot of research. There's the Himalayan Codex opens with a helicopter scene, and so I spent days working with a helicopter pilot to determine how you would go into this, how you would take a helicopter into this spot, and then what would happen if, in the event that there was an emergency. And so there's a lot of, I mean, we don't make a lot of stuff up. The story, of course, is is from our mind. None of this stuff didn't
Right.
happen, of course. But a lot of the research is necessary in both fiction and nonfiction, as far as I'm concerned.
Sure. How long does it take to write one of these McCready novels?
I would say, and you got to remember that both of us have
Sure.
other jobs, and so I would say a year.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and then we're just about to sign for the third, and so I imagine it's going to take a year to do that. It took a solid year to do the Himalayan Codex. We had slightly longer
That
to do
was
Hell's
going
Gate.
to be my next question: is will there be a follow up? So it sounds like
Yeah.
you guys have really found an audience for these books, and they want more.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Yeah, we are about to sign a contract for book 3. So that is a go. And I'll be writing that. We'll be writing that this summer.
Is there any talk about maybe a film adaptation or anything?
It's funny because the book is being represented at an extremely high level. It's just that when you're writing a series like this,
Sure.
It takes a while to catch on, and so I think that when you're if you're not writing a sequel, or if you're not coming up with something that I don't know, the types of movies that are popular today. I won't get into the specifics, but when you're writing something original and it is a series, I think it probably is going to take a bit longer to catch on. And so while we've gotten a lot of positive, very, very positive reaction, at this point we're still, the Himalayan Codex is now currently being shopped, where initially we only had this one book, but now it's now that there's 2 of them out there, I think that the chances of something coming to fruition are much higher.
Well, we're going to do our part to try to raise the level to get people to pay attention here. I cannot highly recommend these books enough. Bill Schutt, it's been a great honor to talk with you. Where can people find you online if they want to follow your work and see the great variety of stuff that you do?
Oh, sure. Let's see. My website is billschutt.com. That's BILLSCHUTT.com. I'm also on Twitter at Bill Schutt Author, and I have a Facebook page, Bill Schutt Author. So it's pretty easy to follow me. Also, I've got an author's page on Amazon and another on Goodreads.
Excellent.
So I've got a lot of and I do like to interact with my readers. I love, as they'll see, I respond pretty quickly when folks ask me questions, and I think that's part of my role as somebody who's a writer now, is to help people out or answer questions about this industry,
sure.
and about what what it takes.
And the world
now.
is such a vastly different place than you think 50 years ago when you sit at a typewriter, you bang out a book and you send it to your publisher, and then you go do whatever else, and the writer is this this lone figure on the hill that is unassailable, and I love it that that gap has been bridged, and we can actually talk with people.
Oh yeah, I mean, social media is great for that, and so I've had a lot of really positive responses and a lot of great interaction. If somebody says something and they want to comment at me, I have, I'm sort of happy to put my 2 cents in. I think people go into writing or they dream about being writers, and then there's a reality that somebody needs to tell you about, and I love doing what I do, but I'm certainly happy that I have another career as well.
Sure. Bill, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm going to link up all the places where people can find you in the show notes. The Himalayan Codex, an R.J. McCready novel, drops on June the 6th. It's up for pre-order now. I'll have a link to it in the show notes. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Thank you very much, Hank. It was a pleasure being on your show.
Thanks for listening. Now stay tuned for an audio clip from Richard Glebes. Find a link in the show notes.
His body broke free of its paralysis, and he stumbled forward, losing his balance. He fell down the slope towards the spot where they had been. His hand shot out unthinkingly, and he grabbed the corner of the black stone bridge. Hoofbeats. Pounding hoofbeats. Coming closer. Coming up the road. Someone or something galloped towards him. The head of an emaciated horse burst from the gloom of the road. The rider was fumbling, out of control, without saddle or bridle, clutching at the white mane, kicking the beast across the hindquarters with his thin legs, his face a frozen mask of terror. He whipped around to look back over his shoulder. Something chased him. Something terrible. Jason spun away as the horse ran over him, spearing him through the chest with its iron-shod hooves. He was unhurt. The horse galloped upward and across the bridge, across strong timbers rough-hewn and knot-holed. The rider wheeled the horse about, looking back from the far shore. He was wheezing. A sloppy white ruffle bobbed under his chin. His face was hopeful now. A familiar face, much like the one Jason saw every morning in the mirror. Something thundered up behind Jason, not with a clatter of hoofbeats, but with the teeth-rattling thunder of stone on stone. Ichabod, yes, of course, the man was Ichabod, wailed, and the sound of his terror echoed across the valley. The hot breath of a horse burned the back of Jason's neck. He stood frozen, unable to turn his head to see the thing behind him. He didn't want to. This was no ordinary vision. He felt with certainty that the rider behind him, no, the horseman behind him, knew he was there. Ichabod kicked his horse. It reared, brayed, and would have thrown him but for the fistfuls of its mane he clutched. Horse and rider spun in place on the far side of the bridge, disoriented. The horseman behind Jason laughed, a terrible, deep, cracking sound from all directions like 1,000 axes chopping down the woods. Jason felt searing heat as a ball of flame whipped over his shoulder. A burning jack-o'-lantern arced across the bridge. Its maniacal face spun end over end. It grinned back at Jason for an instant, spun around and crashed into Ichabod's temple, knocking him from his horse and into the dust. The pumpkin careened upwards, exploding against the trees, shooting tendrils of flame up their trunks, igniting branches and showering the world with sparks and flaming leaves. Jason recoiled, fell to his knees, and threw his arms over his face. His lungs and heart pumped wildly. They slowed. He brought his arms down. The bridge was broken again. It was over.
Thanks for tuning in to the Author Stories podcast. You can find new